So let's get started. So I think the main thing that we want to touch on with this one is a little bit of a SDLC autopsy. So basically, I think what Robin was trying to achieve through this talk and what he went on a journey of discovery here is that things have gotten significantly better if we take a look at the vulnerability reports that we are currently giving for the application assessments that we are performing. But it's interesting that some of these issues, these pesky issues, still remain. And I think the only way for us to be able to really understand why these issues are here still today is by actually doing a little bit of a deep dive into our software development life cycles and taking it from there. So I think if we start with looking what it looked like 10 years ago, then systems were significantly less complex. You had a web application. I know we're showing a front end for you there as well. I think most applications 10 years ago didn't even have like a segregated front end. It was front end and back end were mixed together. But we had these small little pockets of applications, and systems were really a lot less complex with smaller teams that were working on them. But there wasn't actually a lot of resources or guidance around security, which led to reports like this. I don't know who of you have had the unfortunate experience of seeing a report like this one. Hopefully not today anymore, otherwise we should have a chat. But this was basically the reports that we would be giving on about 90% of our assessments. And then things changed, right? Technology evolved. We are now building sort of like these massive ecosystems and everything like that. And you are lucky if your diagram today looks like this, right? In today's systems, it's a lot more complex. You're lucky if there is even a diagram explaining it. And if we talk about documentation, it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time, right? The amount of times we join scoping calls and like, no, but wait, there's more information here and there's more information here. And we're like, can you send us something? And then the entire process breaks down at that point. But things have gotten significantly more complex. We have a lot of different teams that are actually working on these things, and we don't actually in today's time have an application in isolation. I think it's fair to call these systems ecosystems, right? Because everything's interconnected to everything else. And this has created significantly more complex systems and significantly more teams that are integrating and working on these systems. But we have also gotten a lot better at resources, tools, and sort of a decade of guidance of how to do security well, right? So we have seen improvements, even though systems have gotten significantly more advanced. We have actually seen improvement, and our vulnerabilities in our reports are looking a little bit something like this now. It's better, right? But there's still something that is missing here. If we take a look here, then what's very interesting is there's a couple of repeat offenders, right? Vulnerabilities such as authorization not being enforced. Interestingly, things like cross-site scripting and SQL injection, which is weird for me because given today's time, shouldn't our frameworks be able to cater for this? Like, if you just don't tamper with a front-end framework, you shouldn't have cross-site scripting, and yet still in today's time we have it. So like, what's actually happening here? Why are we still seeing some of these persistent issues, even though things have gotten a lot better? And I think this is where we sort of take a step back and we say, look, vulnerability counts have definitely dropped, right? But there's certain issues that we are still seeing remain here. And things like our coding frameworks and everything that we have here should be taking care of it, but it isn't. So like, why is this still happening in modern web applications? Why is it still, and I promise you, when you go look at our history of reports, we're still finding things like authorization bypasses. We're still finding SQL injection and cross-site scripting. Why is that when we had a decade of guidance in how to avoid these issues as well? So I think, simply put, and that can basically be the conclusion of the talk as well, is that all of these issues can be explained by saying that security was not embedded in the software development lifecycle. So thanks for coming to my talk. This is the end, right? And this is where we stop things, right? But I think the issue behind saying that is like, why? What's happening here in the software development lifecycle? Why is this going wrong? Right? Most of our clients have established processes to be able to avoid these type of things, but they're simply not being followed. But that's also not necessarily sort of an answer that we can give here. So we need to take a little bit of a step back and talk about things like people, processes, and technology. Now, I think on the technology front, we've covered things in the last decade. Technology has given us significant advancements. Things like modern frameworks should be catering for these type of things. So it means that from a technology front, I think we're doing a lot better there. We can still do better, but I think using our tooling, using our technology there, that is the one area where we have placed a lot of focus. But it's important to know that that technology doesn't exist in isolation. There's processes as well, making sure that we are actually doing the security activities during our software development lifecycle. And then we have people involved here, right? So do our people, not just our developers, but our project managers, do they have sufficient security knowledge to be able to understand where security needs to be embedded here as well? So what I want to do is I'm going to take you through a couple of case studies that we have found over a couple of recent years and sort of diving a little bit deeper into an understanding of what is actually at the heart of that issue. So for the first case study, we basically were working with a team where we were performing a simulation of a source code review. So we were helping with a little bit of training, and we wanted to help developers understand or gain an understanding of how they should be identifying vulnerabilities. In today's time, I think that's quite important. I think a lot of you sitting here know that you're basically doing about 50 to 100 pushes to prod within a single day. So who's your stopgap there? Another developer reviewing basically that pull request of another developer, right? So that review part, even though you have tooling for it, that manual review is just as important. And what was very interesting is when we simulated this for a team of developers, is none of them could actually find SQL injection. The code that we gave them was vulnerable to SQL injection, and not a single one of those developers were able to identify the SQL injection vulnerability. But what's very interesting is they found all of the other vulnerabilities, right? They were able to identify them, tag them, and say, this is something that needs to be fixed. And when we had discussions with them, they also actually knew what SQL injection was, and they knew how to remediate it. Not anything like input validation or sanitization. Directly, we need to parameterize these queries. So they knew how to fix SQL injection, and they knew of SQL injection, but they couldn't identify that vulnerability in code. So what actually happened here is we learned that these developers have been so relying on frameworks and getting training for what does secure SQL queries look like, they don't actually know what a vulnerable SQL query looks like. That inverse of how do I actually find a vulnerability, what does the vulnerable version of this code look like, was something that has fallen flat. Now, I think that is actually important because what if they onboard a new developer and that new developer doesn't understand SQL injection and introduces that vulnerability? None of them would be able to find it through a peer review. So in this case, we had a people problem, right? An educational problem that we had to solve here. And it's not just a generic educational problem. I don't think that's me. We had a educational problem that needed to be solved here, not just generic in the sense of, do you know SQL injection and does it work for you, but rather, I'm sorry, like I'm already doing a talk I'm not familiar with, like my one-track mind is gonna burn here. So let's try this. But essentially teaching them about the vulnerabilities itself. What does it look like when it's vulnerable, right? Learning that type of information there. The second case study that I would like to focus on for this one here is that this was on an application security assessment, and this application was littered with authorization issues. So for those of you that don't understand, authorization is basically after the user authenticated, making sure that that user had the right permissions to be able to recover the information or make the changes that they are trying to make. And it's also very interesting when we talk about authorization issues, we're seeing a lot more of them in what we would call horizontal authorization issues than vertical issues. It's easy for someone to say that an admin should be able to perform this function, so we do that check. But as soon as it's user A is trying to perform an action they're allowed to perform, but with user B's data, we see an authorization bypass happening there as well. And it's very, very interesting when we sort of touched on with these developers and everything, there wasn't actually a business case for this thing where multiple users could view the data from other users. So it wasn't like a feature that they were going to implement at a later point and they didn't implement it correctly. There was no business case for one user seeing the data from another user. But there were no injection vulnerabilities whatsoever, right? So no injection, they handled input correctly, did their sanitization and their encoding and everything. So they understood security concepts. So we basically had a little bit of a workshop with them and a discussion, and here is where it came out that the development was rushed. There was deadlines that they had to meet. And this basically resulted in them skipping certain security activities that are part of their normal processes there. And what's the worst about this, because we only found the vulnerabilities in the verification stage of SDLC, that basically pushed the deadline further than what it would have been if they introduced it earlier in the SDLC process there. So this is a process issue that we have identified here as well. On the next case study, again, a security assessment. And this was one where we had multiple different teams that were working on the same ecosystem. So I'm not talking just about internal development teams. I think this was an assessment with around 5 or 6 different third parties involved in the mix as well, taking responsibility for the various components that needed to be integrated in this application. And we found authorization bypasses everywhere. Now, initially, talking to the security team, they wanted to invest in training for their developers and the third parties to help and teach them about this stuff. We had conversations with them, and everyone knew how to implement authorization. They knew this. They knew that authorization bypasses is an issue. They knew how to fix it, right? So then what actually happened here? Like, why did no one actually implement these controls? And it turns out that the process was here, but no one team took responsibility for it. Because we had this amount of third parties working on a system, everyone was thinking that everyone else was going to do it, so they don't need to worry about this. So where do we even start with this? Because it's not an educational issue, right? They have knowledge of it. They understand how authorization and authorization bypasses work. It's not a process issue. They have the processes. They know what they need to do here, so that's definitely not the issue as well. And I don't think we are able to solve this with technology. I don't think there's like a new technology tool that we can necessarily buy that's going to solve this for us. So then where do we go here? So taking a further step back, I think just viewing people, process, and technology is probably where the issue is coming in here. There's a fourth element that we need to attach here, which is ownership. Right? And ownership doesn't fit by itself, but it's sort of something that is over people and processes, where there's an element of asking the question of who is going to be responsible, who's actually taking ownership of the process and making sure that it gets implemented. Without ownership, we can have the best people, the best technology, and the best processes, but if no one is taking that accountability to implement them, it's basically not going to happen. So, let's talk through what does a secure software development lifecycle actually look like. And I think in today's time, we actually have a lot of resources that can be used for this. If you are developing an application, you can use resources like OWASP, which has a developer guide. There's software assurance maturity models. There's the ASVS, which is the application security verification standard. So there's a lot of things that can be covered, what we would call generic security requirements that we can cover throughout the software development lifecycle. Any deviation to these standards, right, if we are using these standards, any deviation to it, we need to understand why are we deviating from these standards. So passwords, for example, will not expire because we have a business requirement for it, right? We need to note that down because otherwise, at some point, standards almost become suggestions, right? If we're not actually going to implement them and if we're not going to tag why we aren't adhering to a certain standard there as well. And then if we take a look at what does a secure software development lifecycle look like, then let's step through it with something like requirements for a start here. So in our requirements, when we are basically sourcing the requirements for what we want to develop here, we need someone in those sessions to basically go, what is the security requirements that we need here as well? Oh, we want to introduce this new feature. Who in that session is taking responsibility for going, okay, what do we need to take into consideration from a security perspective to be able to implement this? This is where things like our standards and our frameworks are basically coming into play. And if we think back to the case study, this is where ownership comes in. In the requirements part of our software development lifecycle, we can lock in ownership. We can basically lock in who is going to take responsibility for these security requirements and ensure that they are going to be implemented. Next, in the design phase, right, if we want to make it secure, this is where we're going to do elements such as design reviews. We might do threat modeling. And basically what we want to do here is when we have those user journeys, when we have those design diagrams, we want to think like a threat actor and understand where they would be possible to inject into these systems, and then be actually very, very explicit in what security we are going to implement there. So why don't our user journey documents, for example, actually indicate what is going to be the security requirements that will be implemented there as well, right? We first need to check whether a user session or that specific user should have access to that data before we're going to return it to them. We can basically do that in our design phase here as well. And this is where processes comes in, right? This would deal with case study 2 to make sure that basically we're including our security processes in this design phase. Why this is important? Because in your design phase, you are basically setting the timelines for your project. You're basically locking in how long it should take you to implement these type of things. And if you're already considering security in this phase, the implementation of security will be taken into consideration with those timelines there as well. And then in our implementation phase, this is where we're going to rely on things like code reviews, SaaS tooling, so our analysis of our code that we want to do. And this is after implementation, before we're going to push to production, before we're going to release that code, making sure that we do a review of that code to be able to understand where there's possible vulnerabilities. And this is where we address the people problem, right? If we have developers, right, project managers that have the ability to identify vulnerabilities, we are able to already fix it in the implementation phase, right, before we move over to verification, before we check things and get it in there. And then we verify. I want to make it clear, you should be doing verification, right? Whether that's through things like DOS tooling or whether that is through penetration testing, you should be doing verification, right? Everything we're talking about today is fundamentally to make sure that we can detect these issues sooner, which is going to reduce the cost of fixing them. If we are able to fix issues in the requirements phase, right, that is significantly cheaper than getting a verification, finding that there's a vulnerability, and having to do this entire SDLC process again. But verification is still important. Because fundamentally, if you don't do verification, right, it's going to be very costly when you have a breach, when that thing goes into production and there's an issue there. That's why we still need to do verification, even though we have introduced security into our entire SDLC process. So how can we then look to basically address these issues within SDLC? It's easy to talk about these things, but what are the practical ways that we can look to implement this here as well? And fundamentally, our ultimate goal is to try and remove these legacy vulnerabilities from our modern code. So what we have put together is a SDLC security improvement toolkit. And I think it starts with a workshop where we need to take a little bit of a step back and a snapshot of what do you actually have in place. So which security activities are you actually performing? And what security activities do you think are missing? And then finding the right solution for your organization there. So I think the elements that you're looking for is that if you identify that you have a people problem, you have an element where your developers or your project team are not able to identify those vulnerabilities, you want to proceed with training. If it's processes, then, and again, I want to make it clear, it's not just the implementation of the process, but also the adoption of it. Maybe you have the processes, but like all good documentation for development, it's everywhere and nowhere, and no one actually knows what those processes are. That adoption element is just as important. And for ownership, again, making sure that you're on top of things for tracking activities and bringing the SecOps element closer to that development lifecycle there as well. And for technology, there's always more technology that can be integrated there. Just be very mindful of what problem you're trying to solve by the integration of that technology in those elements. But basically, we want to get to the point where it's possible for organizations to perform a SDLC tabletop exercise for themselves. So what does this look like? We basically want to make sure that you're evaluating your team's capabilities in implementation and execution of a secure SDLC. And then you want to use metrics to measure those weak points, right? And then make sure that you're implementing elements that's going to address it and measure the progress of improvement there as well. So what does this look like? I think fundamentally it is a point where you need to decide who's actually going to take part of your tabletop. And those are not necessarily just your developers that you want to pull into this tabletop exercise. Like I mentioned, a lot of this security also sits with a project manager or a scrum master, but essentially the entire team that is taking responsibility for getting the solution. Then at this point, decide sort of what are you going to use for your tooling, for your communication mediums, and for basically the tasks that are going to happen during the tabletop exercise. And then you need a scenario. And the easiest way to do a scenario is to mimic what you would normally do in a software development lifecycle. So pick an example scenario that you can use and you can run your project team through there as well. In today's time with artificial intelligence, you can use a couple of keywords and it will be able to create a scenario for you for a product that you are looking to create. And there's a lot of words there. We are just going to focus on the elements of building a payment feature in a specific application, and we want the ability to create payments, and we also want the ability to view payment history. That's the two features that we are looking to implement in this application. You can then start your tabletop exercise by basically starting with requirements, right? So take them through the normal SDLC process where the focus would be on getting business requirements first. So for creating the new payment, you basically want to have elements such as the ability to select an account, right? Entering the account of the recipient, adding a reference. All of these are business requirements that you need for performing the process. And then you take it a step further. Then you say, these are the business requirements for implementing these features. What are the security requirements that we need to implement? And things like the application security verification standard can help quite a lot here as well. So an example of that would be that when we are talking about taking user input, for our creation of a new payment, we're going to take an account number and also a reference for the payment. That means that we're taking user input. The application verification standard would basically talk to the fact that when we display that input again, we want to make sure that the output is encoded and escaped so that it cannot actually execute within the user's browser. There's also, just to make it clear, we can also not necessarily just use the big PDF of ASVS, but it's actually Excel sheets and online tools that can be used where you can search for the specific criteria that you need to meet to these ones as well. We have one for SQL. We know that we're going to touch a database, so it's going to be important to make sure that we parameterize those queries when we are fetching information from our database. And then we also know that we are implementing business logic when we make a payment. So we need to take care of business logic flaws as well, which can be an issue for us here, such as, for example, things like a negative payment or very interesting stuff where, for example, decimals are not being treated correctly, which leads to almost infinite money glitches that you can do in those type of systems. So now we're bringing those security requirements in our process here as well. And again, we want to track not just our business requirements, but now we're tracking those security requirements as well. In our exercise, we can then move to the design phase. And this is basically where we are going to do an element of threat modeling. So let's focus down specifically on the ability or the feature that we want to implement of viewing a specific payment detail. We can have an example of a flow that we would be taking with this. And this would be the flow where the user is basically going to click on a specific payment and it's going to send that transaction ID. And then if the user is authenticated, it would basically display that input to the user. We can take the team and we can do a little bit of threat modeling here and going like, what can potentially go wrong? Because this would be the design document if we don't necessarily at this point want to introduce those security elements into our design as well. So let's be explicit with it. If we're simply going to send a transaction ID, we are checking for authentication, but not for authorization. So when we do this threat modeling, we can see that there is the potential for this to not perform authorization, and we can assume that in the implementation phase, we're going to check authorization as well. But if we're not explicit about it in our design, we can run into those issues where it's not implemented. SQL injection is possible when we are pulling the information from the database, and when we display it back to the user, there is the opportunity for cross-site scripting. So now we can update our designs to take care of security here as well. So after performing authentication, we will perform an authorization check. We will deliberately in our design documents not just talk about a lookup in the database, but making sure that we're using parameterized queries for the lookup in the database. And when we want to return the data to the user and display it, we are explicit that we want to make sure that we are contextually encoding the output that's going to the user there as well. So now we have essentially eliminated the likelihood of these vulnerabilities, making it further into the implementation phase. As you can see here, we can basically then go and prioritize these different threats and use this prioritization to decide which of these we are going to already try to address in the design phase and which ones of these are we okay to take further or we don't need to implement more security. And I think the most important thing with that there as well is that security comes at a cost, right? It is going to slow down the development lifecycle. But fundamentally, if we can cause that slowdown in the earlier phases of the SDLC, it means that we're not going to have an entirely new SDLC to re-implement if it's vulnerable in the verification stage. Then we can look at implementation. So again, this is where we're going to look at things like static code analysis, doing code reviews. Now, in our case, what we have done here is we have basically given developers pieces of source code for them to do reviews on and identify the vulnerabilities within them as well. So to showcase what that looks like, we can give access to an environment where there is some source code for them to go through, and we ask the developers to basically make use of any of the tooling that they are going to be comfortable and use in their everyday lives. You want this tabletop exercise to mimic as close as possible to what they would be doing on a real development cycle there as well. And again, saying again, in today's time with things like artificial intelligence, you can type a couple of keywords and you have an example application that you can ship here for review as well. And the idea is to identify the vulnerabilities in the code and then also remediate those vulnerabilities, identify what the remediation for that vulnerability is, because both of those components are important. You first need to be able to identify it, and then once you identify it, know how you're going to fix it as well. And our recommendation and what we do through our system is to basically track those identifications and remediations through a ticketing system as well. And then we can verify. Then we can basically, in our exercise, make use of our DAS tooling and do passive scanning, active scanning. In today's time, we can use a lot of those tools that we need to do to basically review these features. So we have elements such as Burp that we can use to fingerprint, scan, run a couple of attacks against them to scan these applications to see if there's any of the vulnerabilities that we have missed during the rest of our SDLC process there as well. And this is basically what we want to do, get results of basically what have we missed in the rest of our SDLC process to identify the possible weaknesses in training, in the tooling that we have, and also the processes that have led to those vulnerabilities in this tabletop exercise being exposed in the verification stage as well. So, how do we actually measure this? each of these phases we can basically evaluate and we can measure against our people, processes, and ownership as well, right? And this can be used to identify the weak points that we need to address, and then we can start with measuring the progress there as well. Now, for the first two phases, for the requirements and design phase, there's a lot more discussion-based work that we need to do there, with the verification phase being highly focused on making sure that the team is using the tooling correctly. So we're just going to touch on how we measure this within the implementation phase. With the other phases, that discussion base should highlight the issues that are available there. And as I mentioned before, for the implementation phase, we focused on identification and remediation as well. So can they identify the vulnerabilities? And if they have identified the vulnerabilities, can the developer fix the vulnerability as well? And running a couple of these, you can start to pull some interesting statistics. We can see which of the vulnerabilities they were able to identify, which of the vulnerabilities they were able to remediate. Are we talking about only sort of medium risk vulnerabilities, or is it across the board? And when we actually start to do a deep dive, we have, for example, on one of these exercises found that a significant amount of the developers were unable to identify the broken access control vulnerability. And now we know that we can basically use this to give contextual training to this team and tell them essentially what are the elements that they need to focus on to be able to increase this one. Doing more tabletop exercises at that point can basically be used to see whether the training that we have implemented here is actually in line with what we want to do. And when we actually bring it back to the vulnerability reports that you are receiving, are you seeing a match between the areas of weakness in your training as well as what we are uncovering when vulnerability assessments or security assessments are being performed there? And the idea behind the use cases for this is for your existing developers, it's one thing to say that you have the tooling, it's one thing to say that you have the team and the processes, but are they actually working effectively? The only way to test that is by actually doing an exercise end-to-end of all of it and making sure that you can then assign training or cater for those weak points specifically where they are. Measuring the progress is going to be important because that's the only way that you have the ability to know whether you're moving things forward. And for new developers, I think the element that we can bring in here as well is to actually test new developers as part of our recruitment pipeline. Are these people that actually have security as a conscious element in their coding? And can we basically raise the hiring process to allow us to narrow down the candidates that are better suited for our positions here as well? As a summary to all of this, I think we have definitely seen that things have gotten significantly better. The amount of vulnerabilities that we are finding is drastically decreasing, but there are several key issues that seem to remain pesky, and we're still finding them today. The only ways that we think that we are able to address this is if we move away from just looking at the technology, which I think has been a significant focus point, but actually focus on our people and our processes, and especially our ownership element as well. The only way to do this is if you actually run a test of your SDLC process, if you actually put them through a tabletop exercise and seeing where those weak points are, identifying them, and then hyper-focusing down to address those specific endpoints. And knowing that there's no one-size solution that's going to work for everyone. This is about creating a secure SDLC process uniquely for your organization and the needs that you have there. Thank you very much.